June 17, 1994. Los Angeles is burning with tension. Millions of Americans are watching television as police follow a white Ford Bronco down a California freeway. Inside the vehicle is one of the most recognizable men in America, O.J. Simpson, a former football superstar, a Hollywood celebrity, a man who once seemed almost untouchable. But now, police want to arrest him. He is wanted in connection with the brutal murders of his ex-wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and her friend, Ronald Goldman. And what happens next will become one of the most watched, debated, and controversial criminal trials in American history. But here's what makes this case so fascinating. The evidence will become a battle. The courtroom will become a stage. Race, celebrity, domestic violence, policing, forensic science, and public opinion would collide. And at the center of it all was one question. Did O.J. Simpson murder Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman? For more than a year, America would wait for an answer, but the verdict would leave one of the deepest mysteries of the case unresolved. Because sometimes a courtroom can deliver a verdict without delivering the answer everyone is looking for. June 12, 1994. It is a warm Sunday night in Brentwood, Los Angeles. Nicole Brown Simpson is at her home on Bundy Drive. She is 35 years old. Nicole and O.J. Simpson have been married for years, but their relationship had become increasingly troubled. They eventually divorced. That night, Nicole is spending time with her children and family. Nearby, a young restaurant worker named Ronald Goldman is also making his way toward the neighborhood. Neither knows that before the night is over, their lives will end violently. Later that evening, Nicole's mother becomes concerned. Something is wrong. Eventually, a shocking discovery is made outside Nicole's home. Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman are found dead. The scene is horrific. Police begin treating the location as a double homicide. And almost immediately, investigators face a crucial question. Who will want them dead? But there's another problem. There is a connection between the victims that leads investigators directly towards someone very famous. Nicole's former husband, O.J. Simpson. Before becoming the most famous suspect in America, O.J. Simpson had spent decades building an extraordinary public image. He had been a college football star, then a professional football superstar. He played for the Buffalo Bills and later the San Francisco 49ers. He became the first NFL player to rush for more than 2,000 yards a season. But football wasn't the only reason Americans recognized him. Simpson became an actor, a television personality, a commercial spokesman. To millions of people, O.J. Simpson was not simply famous. He was familiar. He appeared in advertisements. He appeared on television. He appeared in movies. He had crossed a cultural line that few athletes ever crossed. He had become a celebrity. And that celebrity would become one of the most important elements of the case. Because now, the man Americans had watched on television for years was being investigated for murder. But investigators weren't starting from nothing. They were looking at the relationship between Simpson and Nicole, and there was a troubling history. Nicole had previously reported incidents of domestic abuse. Police had been called to the couple's home. There were documented concerns about violence in their relationship. That history would become central to the prosecution's case. But the defense would later argue that the investigation itself was deeply flawed. And before the trial ever began, the evidence would start piling up. Investigators begin examining the crime scene. Blood, footprints, hair, fibers, and other physical evidence. Then investigators discover something potentially devastating. Blood evidence appears to connect Simpson to the crime scene. But the investigation doesn't stop there. Police examine Simpson's home. They examine his vehicle. They search for anything that might connect him to the murders. And investigators discover additional blood evidence. A trail of forensic clues begins forming. To prosecutors, the picture appears increasingly clear. But there's a problem with forensic evidence. Evidence can be powerful, but evidence is only as reliable as the people who collect, preserve, test, and explain it. And the defense would eventually attack every part of that process. They would argue that evidence had been mishandled, that investigators had made mistakes, that police had reasons to frame Simpson, and most importantly, they would question the credibility of the Los Angeles Police Department. One detective in particular would become central to the defense strategy. His name was Mark Furman, and his past would become one of the most explosive revelations of the entire trial. As investigators close in, O.J. Simpson is expected to surrender to police, but he doesn't. Instead, he disappears. Authorities eventually announce that Simpson is wanted, and suddenly, the case becomes something much bigger than a murder investigation. America is watching. News helicopters are searching. Television networks interrupt regular programming. Then comes the image that would define the case. A white Ford Bronco traveling slowly along a Los Angeles freeway. Police vehicles behind it. Helicopters overhead. Inside the Bronco is O.J. Simpson. Millions watch. Some people are stunned. Others are angry. Others simply cannot look away. It is a surreal moment. A former football superstar is being followed by police while television cameras broadcast the pursuit live. Eventually, Simpson is taken into custody, and now there is no turning back. The murder investigation has become a national spectacle, but the real battle is only beginning. January 1995, the trial begins. The prosecution presents Simpson as a man whose troubled relationship with Nicole had escalated. They argue that jealousy, anger, and violence provide a motive. The defense presents a very different story. They argue that Simpson has been targeted by investigators. They attack the police. They question the forensic evidence. And they remind the jury that the burden of proof is not simply suspicion. It is proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Then the courtroom drama intensifies. The prosecution presents DNA evidence. At the time, DNA testing is still unfamiliar to many ordinary Americans. But in this case, it becomes one of the prosecution's most important weapons. Blood evidence is presented. Laboratory results are discussed. The prosecution argues that the genetic evidence places Simpson in a position that is extremely difficult to explain innocently. But the defense doesn't simply fight the science. They fight the people behind it. Because if the jury begins doubting the investigators, they may begin doubting the evidence too. And then, the case takes a dramatic turn. Detective Mark Furman had been one of the investigators involved in the case, but the defense discovered something troubling. Recordings surfaced in which Furman had used racial slurs. The revelation was explosive. The trial was no longer only about murder. Now it was also about race. The defense argued that Furman could not be trusted. They suggested that a racist police officer might have planted evidence to frame Simpson. The prosecution disputed the broader implications, but the damage was enormous. The defense didn't need to prove every part of its alternative theory. It needed to create doubt. And the Furman recordings gave the defense something powerful, a reason for jurors to question the credibility of a key investigator. Then came one of the most famous moments in courtroom history, the gloves. During the trial, prosecutors presented gloves they believed were connected to the murders. One glove had been found at Simpson's property. Another had been found near the crime scene. The prosecution believed the gloves could help connect Simpson to the killings. Then Simpson was asked to try them on. The courtroom watched. He struggled. The gloves appeared tight. The moment was captured by cameras, and defense attorney Johnny Cochran seized upon it. He delivered a phrase that would become permanently associated with the trial. If it doesn't fit, you must acquit. The moment was devastating for the prosecution's presentation. But the glove demonstration wasn't the only issue. The defense continued attacking the collection and handling of evidence. They questioned whether blood samples had been properly preserved. They questioned laboratory procedures. They questioned police credibility. And they reminded jurors that Simpson did not have to prove his innocence. The prosecution had to prove his guilt, beyond a reasonable doubt. And slowly, the trial became less about one piece of evidence, and more about whether the jury trusted the entire investigation. Outside the courtroom, America was divided. The trial was being followed obsessively. Television coverage dominated news cycles. People discussed the case at work, at home, in restaurants, at schools. The courtroom had become entertainment, politics, culture, and tragedy all at once. But beneath the spectacle were serious questions. Could a celebrity receive a fair trial? Could racial tensions influence the justice system? Could police misconduct destroy an otherwise strong case? Could forensic science be trusted? And perhaps the biggest question, was the public watching a murder trial or watching America argue with itself? The prosecution believed the evidence pointed toward Simpson. The defense believed the investigation was compromised, and the jury had to decide which story they believed. Then, after months of testimony, the case reached its final stage. Closing arguments. The attorneys made their final appeals. The jury was instructed on the law, and then they disappeared behind closed doors. America waited. October 3rd, 1995. The courtroom is packed. Millions are watching. The jury enters. Everyone becomes silent. The clerk prepares to read the verdicts. O.J. Simpson stands. The world waits. Then the words are spoken. Not guilty. On both murder charges. For the prosecution, the case is over. For the defense, it is a historic victory. Outside the courthouse, reactions are immediate. Some people celebrate. Others are devastated. Some believe justice has been served. Others believe a killer has escaped conviction. And America is left with an uncomfortable reality. A jury had reached a verdict, but the argument wasn't over. Not even close. Because the criminal trial answered one legal question. But it did not erase the evidence. It did not erase the victims. And it did not end the controversy. 2 years later, another courtroom would deliver a very different result. The families of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman pursued a civil case against Simpson. Unlike a criminal trial, the burden of proof was lower. In 1997, a civil jury found O.J. Simpson liable for the deaths of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman. The verdict ordered Simpson to pay substantial damages. So America was left with an extraordinary contradiction. In criminal court, not guilty. In civil court, liable for the deaths. One man, two courtrooms, two different legal standards, two dramatically different outcomes. But perhaps the most important part of this story isn't O.J. Simpson. It is the people whose lives were permanently changed. Nicole Brown Simpson, Ronald Goldman, their families, and a country forced to confront questions about celebrity, race, domestic violence, police credibility, and the limits of forensic evidence. More than 3 decades later, the O.J. Simpson case remains one of the most debated criminal cases in American history. People still analyze the evidence. They still debate the verdict. They still question the investigation. And they still ask the same question. Did O.J. Simpson get away with murder? The criminal court gave its answer. The civil court gave another. History has given neither side complete peace. And perhaps that's why this case remains so powerful. Because it wasn't just about a famous athlete. It wasn't just about DNA. It wasn't just about a bloody crime scene. It became a mirror reflecting America's fears, divisions, prejudices, fascination with celebrity, and complicated relationship with the justice system. And somewhere beneath all the television coverage, beneath the courtroom arguments, beneath the famous names and unforgettable moments, were two people whose lives ended violently. Nicole Brown Simpson, Ronald Goldman. Their deaths created a mystery that would consume a nation. And decades later, the debate still hasn't disappeared. But if you think the O.J. Simpson trial was the most shocking courtroom story America has ever seen, wait until you discover what happened in some of the country's other infamous cases. Because sometimes the evidence isn't what it first appears to be. This is Midnight Case Files. Subscribe now and stay with us, because sometimes the truth is clearer than fiction at the end.